Welcome back to a Slice of Empathy podcast. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Amanda or Panda Ludwig. Amanda is an award-winning entrepreneur and multi-company founder with a diverse skill set that has earned her recognition in fields that range from corporate finance to nonprofit management. But the most profound part of her journey is one that unfolds in a hospital room. She talks about understanding the key motivators for high-performing achievers, and how we can celebrate our wins and successes so we can end the perpetual cycle of our wins never being enough. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm super excited to learn about your background and your journey from being a successful entrepreneur to becoming a spokesperson for the anti-hustle movement. Would you be able to share a little bit more about your journey?
Yeah, gosh, golly, where do I begin? Really, my journey probably started earlier than I realized, but typically I would say the starting point for me was when I was sitting in a doctor's office and they told me if I didn't slow down, I was going to die.
Oh my gosh. What initially inspired you to start your own business? How did you navigate that prognosis and that challenge along the way?
When I started my business, I would love to say I had this great business idea and, this 5-year plan and grew it strategically. But if I'm being perfectly transparent, I started my company because my husband at the time and I were going through a divorce and we worked together. So we had a business together and that business was going with him in the divorce. And so I suddenly found myself without a spouse and without a job, which meant I needed to find a way to generate income, obviously. I started looking around for jobs that I was qualified for, but they just didn't really have my heart. I wasn't excited about them. And so I got some good job offers, but for some reason, I just kept saying, no, I just don't think this is the right fit for me. And so I got this idea of how I could take my skills, which are, I'm a financial storyteller, right? So I interpret financial data into operational intelligence. And I had been doing that kind of work before working for accounting firms. And so I looked at what my skills were and I looked at what the market needed and said, where can I sort of bridge the gap? And so I started my business as a solopreneur and it took off quickly. It was a very short amount of time before I was needing to hire additional staff and open an office. And it really, really grew quickly. And we had a track record of growing 50% year over year, which is huge growth for a company. And so while everything was great in the company and in my career, my health was really starting to suffer. But because I was so ambitious with my mindset with my company, I really ignored the signs. And I would do everything I could to just kind of put a band-aid on things so that I could keep going in my career. I didn't want my staff or my clients to know that there was something wrong because I felt like, maybe people wouldn't want to work with me if they knew that I wasn't at 100%. So I ignored some early signs and kept pushing through, and then was faced with this reality of, my body couldn't keep going the way that I was. So while my mindset was strong and push through and just, power up and go, 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 my body was telling me a different story. And that was I needed to slow down. And ultimately, I was forced to sell a majority of that successful company to undergo a 2-year medical leave. A time frame which I'm now, of course, maybe when it first started, I wasn't grateful for it, but it's a time now that I'm grateful for because, of course, my health transformation, but also my mindset transformation. And now I'm able to use what I learned during that time to develop a framework to be able to help other people who are in the same place that I was.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's something I definitely can relate to myself and as many other folks who especially work within the United States. I mean, the mentality is, working sometimes not even like just like a 40-hour work week, but sometimes 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And especially with hustle culture and, sometimes having two and three different jobs. And there is this so much pressure to put everything that you have into whatever it is you're doing and then maybe then some, especially if you have multiple positions. And I know for me within the probably the last 10 years or so is kind of when I started noticing like physical manifestations of burnout, because I feel like it's not really as discussed nearly as much as like the mental like capacity, like carrying that mental capacity of the workload and just maybe feeling tired or just maybe you're just disenfranchised or disenthused with whatever it is you're doing. You're no longer interested in the work. You're feeling uninspired. And I think so many of us have gone through that, especially for, working a lot. Are there any maybe tips or suggestions or anything, any maybe signs for someone who's maybe struggling with burnout that aren't maybe as apparent that maybe folks should consider as they're kind of navigating burnout phase? I've heard that there are so many different layers and telltale signs of burnout that we may not actually realize we're burned out. Are there any signs, anything that we should look for or listen to in our gut instinct when we might be approaching that burnout, or any ways that maybe we can try to prevent it?
Absolutely. And you just touched on some of the key ones. One is being a little disinterested. Sometimes we feel like it's the workplace that is wearing on us, a job that we once loved, and then suddenly we're dreading going to work. It becomes harder and harder to get up in the morning. And I think that because culturally, the answer to that, the solution to that is, just kind of, well, you've got to get up and push yourself a little harder. That's the answer. And so there's, I think, maybe a little bit of guilt that comes along with having that feeling, to the point that we often are unable to ask ourselves, well, why am I feeling this way? I've always loved this job, and, especially in fields where there's really specialized school. And so I mean veterinarians and doctors and lawyers, folks CPAs, who they went to school for that thing. And then and maybe probably still paying off some student loans for that education years later. And they're saying, well, but this is what I do, and I don't love it anymore, but I have to do it because this is what I do. And so it kind of can make us bitter toward our work environment, when in reality, and certainly there are toxic work environments, and that's another conversation, but sometimes it's ourselves pushing ourselves, but viewing it as that the issue is the work environment. And so when we dig a little deeper, that dread and not wanting to go to work and those things can be simply signs that our body is trying to tell us, hey, I need you to take care of me. You've given so much to this job, and now I need you to give a little something to me. And the body can tell us that, but it can come across as this just sort of disinterest in the work. Because if you think about it, what's just really, our minds and bodies are so brilliant. But if you think about how that could happen, if I'm doing something, if I put my hand on a hot stove, right, my body's going to send me pain to tell me, hey, you don't want your hand on that hot stove, right? We all understand how that works. That same thing can happen in our careers with burnout, where we're going to this job and we're giving everything to this job. And sometimes I should be careful to not just say job, because burnout happens with caregivers. Burnout can happen with parenting. I mean, it's not exclusive to our careers, but we're giving everything, every part of ourselves to something, and it's not sustainable, and we're becoming physically exhausted. So why would we think it's strange for our bodies to send a signal that says, I don't want to go there anymore? And that's what the feeling of dread and the not wanting to get out of bed in the morning and all of those things, that's just the signal, just like putting our hand on the stove and feeling pain because our body's telling us, don't put your hand there, it's hot. This manifestation of the dread and then not wanting to get out of bed, sometimes it can manifest as physical pain. Those are all signs that our body's trying to tell us, we don't want to go there anymore. We don't want to do that anymore. We need you to take care of us. And when often when we start taking care of our physical health, that dread lifts, that not wanting to do whatever it was we were doing before, that can either lift from us or we get the clarity of thought to recognize that maybe we do need to make a job change or career change.
I love that you mentioned that because I went through something similar not too long ago where I was trying to figure it out and I ultimately concluded it must have been related to burnout, but I was just tired all the time during the workday, not even just like the midday slump, but I was just tired constantly. And I was trying to figure out if it was a medication I was on, or maybe I didn't get a good night's sleep. And eventually, when I was not working at that position anymore, I noticed that I wasn't really feeling like that anymore, even though I was getting up early, getting up around the same time. I think that shift in what I was doing made such a big difference. And it's like, it's, as you're mentioning, it's not that I didn't like the work I was doing, but I think over time, I think, especially during 2020, I had been lucky enough to avoid a lot of mass layoffs, but there was a lot of work I was doing during that time. And so I think it had something that had built over time. And then, of course, for such a long time, I had been a big yes woman, people pleaser. And I think that kind of compiled to where I was just feeling just so tired all the time because I wasn't able to say no to a lot of different things or ask for help. And I feel like that it may have been a necessary shift for me to maybe consider other options. And I had also had felt like, okay, I'm ready for the next step, but I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm ready to look for another job or another position or see what else is out there. This seems stable. Why would I leave? And so I feel like there might be a lot of people in that position to where you might be afraid of the change, especially if you're at an organization for a long time and you haven't been in the job market for a while. And so I feel like it's so kind of daunting to kind of look at or consider. And so you kind of stay with what's comfortable, even though it may not be like the right fit for you anymore, or you're maybe, ready for that next challenge. But also a lot of us, like we kind of stick with what's comfortable. So it kind of takes that push. So I really appreciate that you mentioned that. And it's interesting because I've also have heard folks say that, yeah, it's too late for me, to change careers or to change different things. Maybe they don't like what they're doing. And of course, I feel like it's never too late to shift to something that you might enjoy doing. But I feel like it's intimidating for so many people if you need to make a shift for any reason.
Absolutely. And you really, I mean, and thank you for sharing what you went through. That's so helpful for your audience to know that there can be a certain amount of fear associated or intimidation when, if you think about it, if you are physically just exhausted, if you're in a place of burnout, then looking for another job is just something, it's just adding more to your plate when you're already exhausted or feeling stressed. And so often it's easy to stay in the same place because if you're lacking energy, if you're fatigued physically and going to work and trying to do your job fatigued, then most likely at the end of the workday, you have no energy to do anything else. I mean, sometimes that means like, you know, spending time with friends and family and all this. It's just like just doing the bare minimum because we're just exhausted. As human beings, we're just exhausted. And so if that's the state that we're in, who has time or energy to be looking for another job if we're already exhausted and, really just getting by in our personal life? And so it's so easy to see how staying in that space, it seems more comfortable and maybe seems like the easier plan. But again, we can work on ourselves and put into play things that will help us physically and mentally with burnout. But to your point, sometimes part of the solution is making that change that maybe we, are a little intimidated by making. But one thing I will say about a job change when it comes to burnout. So certainly we need to be motivated by and excited in our careers. We need to do something that we love. But in a place of burnout, sometimes we can start to hate something that we previously loved because we're exhausted.
Yeah.
So, in making those decisions, if I could give any advice on how do you decide, do I stay or do I go? It's really a deep dive into how we got to where we are in the first place. And the example I can give of that is someone that is very, very successful that I've watched move from company to company, each time with a significant raise. And that's always good. It's always a good part of moving from one company to another is when your salary increases. And this is a person that has a salary, a multi-million-dollar salary. And so all the signs of success, right? The recognition, the salary. But what I noticed in those moves was that in each position, because of lack of boundaries, because even at that high level in corporate America, the feeling like they always needed to give more, be the best, never ask for help, never delegate. They would be excited about a new company and a new role and a raise. And within 6 to 8 months, they reestablished the burnout patterns that they had had at the previous company. And I watched this person do this multiple times, and it's sad, really, but it also helped me to see that part of burnout is a personal responsibility. Part of it is a company responsibility. As a company, we have to take care of our employees. We have to give them resources. We have to create a culture that says, no, we don't want you here 80 hours a week. Go home. We want you to go home. We want you to go see your family. We want you to have a great life. That's part of creating a company culture. But the other part is the personal responsibility. And in studying this person and their behavior, I recognized that the burnout and the stress and the weight on their shoulders was something that they carried from company to company. And for some of us, it's part of our makeup. It's part of who we are. You mentioned, being a yes person. I mean, I love to help people. I love the companies that I coach. I love seeing their success. And I want to, if I can see a solution, I want to dive in and fix it, right? That's who I am as a person. But when we carry that mentality to the extreme of having no boundaries, we then become actually weakened in our ability to help others in any capacity, whether that's our family or in our career or in our community, where we feel like we're we're giving so much because we know how to do it, we know how to help, we can fix it, we can come in and save the day, and we give, which is a wonderful trait. But when we do it to the extent that it damages ourselves, we're actually crippling our effect and crippling our ability to help others. And I think that in our culture, it's almost viewed as selfishness when we start establishing boundaries. And for someone who is a giver and a rescuer and a fixer, we certainly don't want to be viewed as selfish. And so that's a huge part of how we can fix this problem on a large scale is spending time in that self-examination to say, if I am in a burned out state, especially if I can see a pattern of this, it wasn't just the one company I worked for, but I've seen this multiple areas of my life, or I've seen that I have a lack of boundaries in multiple areas of my life. I have a hard time saying no. If we see those patterns, diving in really deep and saying, where is that coming from? And that's the framework that I work off from when I'm speaking on this topic, when I'm teaching it as a workshop, starting with, where is this coming from? And why is this my worldview? And when we identify some of those parts of us, for example, when we connect burnout to a lack of self-worth, where what we're doing for others and the recognition we receive for giving to others is what we really believe our identity is tied to, that sometimes we think if we stop giving as much, our worth is diminished, when in reality, our worth is our worth. And starting there is a huge part of really changing the mindset in regards to this topic, in regards to burnout and boundaries and all of those things is examining if it's a connection to self-worth. And there were other pieces of the framework. That's just a really common one. So I think doing a deep dive and examining how did we get to this point and facing some things. I know for me, I had to face some things that were pretty ugly that I didn't want to really look at. But when we do that, the outcome is so spectacular. It can completely transform our lives. It can bring happiness and joy back into our careers and can enrich our personal lives because we're no longer sacrificing that personal life in order to fulfill our duties and responsibilities. So it's really a full circle transformation that can happen and does happen with people, but it takes a pretty brave person to be willing as an adult to dig deep and identify some things that maybe we haven't faced in the past. But I'm here to say that it's worth it. The work is worth it. And I just wish for people that they do this work, they go through this process before they hit a point in their life like I did, where I had no choice, right? I hit sort of the rock bottom of having to sell my company and undergo medical treatment because of this bizarre medical diagnosis that I received. That's actually what catapulted this revelation that I actually was coming from a place of burnout. That's why I couldn't fight the illness that was taking over my body, because I didn't have anything to fight it with because I had no resources left. So I wish for people to dive deep into this process before they hit that place, because it'll be a faster transformation and it will be a heck of a lot more fun than what I had to go through to get there. But what a joy and honor to be able to help other people now with what I was able to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it kind of makes me think back to, I had a manager years ago who once told me that many of them didn't know what I was thinking, because I was either happy or I had kind of like a poker face on, and I would say yes to everything.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of a turning point for me, because I may have needed some clarifications on items that I was working on, but I was just so eager to please that I would just say yes. at my own detriment. And I think it took that manager at the time to kind of bring me to that level of awareness to where he would say, are you sure, you understand? Do you need to write it down? Anything like that. And so I kind of took this information and from then on, it would kind of be in the back of my mind. I'd always meticulously take notes, make sure to ask if I need any clarification. I mean, it was ultimately, I knew, like, I don't know. I think so many of us are afraid of asking what's called maybe stupid questions or anything like that. But it could be like, it could save us from really making a big like mistake, like in whatever it is that we're doing, if we just ask a clarifying question. And sometimes it's like, for some folks, it could be like ripping that Band-Aid off to be able to ask for clarification. And I know for me, kind of reiterating back what was explained to me is a way, especially for many neurodivergent folks, to kind of understand or let the other person know that you're understanding what they're saying. And so I found that that's been really immensely helpful in kind of going forward and making the like transitions in my career and kind of building off of that. But I wanted to pivot back to a little bit about your medical leave. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced, and how did you maintain hope and motivation during that process?
What a great question, because it was a challenge to stay motivated because again, I hadn't recognized until I was really quite sick that how much I was working and how much of my identity was tied to my career as a business owner and an entrepreneur, and being asked to speak as this leading female entrepreneur and winning all these awards and those things. I hadn't realized how sort of attached to that I was as my identity, and attached to it so much that relationships and friendships and my friends just sort of stopped calling because they knew I was going to say I was too busy for just about anything. And so when I had to face head on the reality of really where I was from a health standpoint, that should have been the thing that scared me to death, having a diagnosis of an illness that, if left untreated, would have claimed my life. That wasn't the part I was afraid of, though, which I'm sure sounds odd. I just sort of had a fighter mentality. I'm going to go through the treatments. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to beat this. I'm going to be better. But the part that really scared me was, what am I going to do in the meantime? And who am I going to be? And what's my job going to be when I go back to work? I mean, most people, when faced with an illness, would be 100% focused on their illness, and they wouldn't be worried, what's my career going to be? I'm taking this time off, and it's going to be difficult to break back into the market. And those were the thoughts that consumed me early on. And I realized that was less about career and more about identity, because I didn't want to let go of my identity as who I was in the business world. And to just become a full-time patient was actually the thing that scared me more than death itself, which is really bizarre. So having to now embrace an identity as a sick person, as someone who viewed themselves as powerful, to now viewing themselves as weak, it really shook my world, and again was a huge part of this journey. And recognizing, well, I'm who I am, whether I own a company or I don't own a company. I'm who I am, whether I'm sick or not sick. Just again, getting to the root of, well, who am I outside of this identity as a businesswoman? Who am I? And what do I actually want in my life? And having the ability to pause through the medical journey, to pause and reevaluate, what wound up happening was, instead of my thoughts being focused on how am I going to relaunch my company? What's my career going to be? And of course, I still had those thoughts, but I began having more thoughts of, when my health returns, what do I want my life to be? Because the recognition that we just have a choice. Our lives are whatever we make them to be, and we choose that. That was really that was really the biggest part of the transformation from the health standpoint was I'm doing all these things to improve my health, but I don't want to do them so I can go right back to living the way I was living before. When my health improves, this is what I want my life to look like. And I honestly think that's a huge part of undergoing a medical journey is you have to have hope. You have to believe that you're going to get better. You have to put in the work, but there's a lot of data and science that supports where we are in our mental health does significantly impact our physical health when we're undergoing some type of a treatment. So when a sick person has a positive attitude toward the outcome and they have a supportive community around them, the data and science supports that they have better outcomes. And so I really, really felt like it was important and still do because I'm still wrapping up treatment. Obviously, I've come so far, but it's not 100% done yet. And I think keeping the positive mindset of one, I am going to get better, I'm going to be restored. And two, that the life I want to live at the end of this journey is not going to be like the life I lived before. Those two things, I think, for someone, whether it's a medical journey or just a really difficult time in life, I think the retaining the hope and also understanding that we are in charge of our lives. Certainly bad things can happen and derail us, but we can't lose focus of where we want to be and what we want our lives to be. So, we have to live in the moment when there are hiccups along the way and trauma and tragedy, but keeping the hope and keeping the vision of what we want our lives to be, I think is actually a truly, truly healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially when it comes to corporate America, so many of us tend to lose ourselves in what it is we're doing and tie it to our identities. I know I was one of the folks affected by the great layoffs of 2024. There's so many folks who have been laid off. And so for me, I had been consistently employed for the past 10 years. And it was kind of a forced stop for me because it kind of made me reevaluate things because I know at least the last 2 years, so much has been going on and I would hardly miss a beat. And as you mentioned, sometimes I would get comments from family members or friends like, you're so busy all the time, why don't you take a minute to recharge and just relax and be present. And I was hearing what they had to say, but it was really hard to kind of break out of that because as you mentioned, like so much of our identities, especially here in the United States, are tied to what we do in like a 9 to 5. And honestly, like for the first week or two after being laid off, it was just like a blur. Like who am I? Like, without like being tied to this position or to this company. And what does that look like? Where do I go from here? And so I feel like anyone who might be going through something like that and feel like kind of like at a crossroads, so to speak, even if it's a difficult situation, it really does like kind of force you to kind of reflect on like what's important in your life. Because I know for me, when I was working, I was too tired to really do anything else after work. I was too tired to really, really go anywhere, do anything on the weekend. And so during this time for me, I sometimes I'll go and take a day trip, we'll go hiking. But when I was working, I was just so tired all the time because of that burnout. And I just didn't feel like doing anything. So for me, it was kind of like a time to kind of reconnect and take that extra care and be more cognizant of what I'm looking for as to my next step, whether that's a new company or a new position, whatever it is that comes afterwards. I want it to be very, not curated, but I want it to be very intentional about where I go next and kind of reflect on what it is I'm looking for and, certain mistakes I don't want to make again or certain things I want in a position that will kind of inevitably lead to that burnout.
Yeah. And that's the whole message, right? You're taking the time to reflect and decide exactly what you want and then pursue that. And it's so hard to do when you're in the middle of it, when you're right in the middle of it to take the time to reflect and make decisions. I mean, part of burnout is the inability to make fast decisions or concise decisions. And so sometimes when we're right in the middle of it, it's really hard to kind of put on the brakes and reroute. But sometimes life gives us these pauses so that to kind of give us the time to make a new plan and pursue it wholeheartedly. But for people who are sort of dead smack in the middle of it and are exhausted, and the thought of switching jobs or kind of rocking the boat in their career by setting some boundaries, one, I mean, we have to stay focused on that there's hope for a different and better life. But a little exercise that I do often if I'm working in a workshop with folks is just ask them to picture their biggest goal right now. And what's the first thing that comes to mind? And most of the time, the biggest goal that comes to mind is somehow a career or monetary goal. So it may be, this promotion they're going after, or they're wanting to buy a boat or a bigger house, or, often it is a financial, somehow tied to the financial. And then I ask them to pause and imagine themselves when they reach that goal. So if it's the promotion, to picture themselves working in that new position with their promotion. And every time I do this exercise, I feel just sort of the mood in the room just kind of plummets, because there's this excitement about the house or the car or the boat or, whatever the next big thing is. But then when we picture ourselves with that thing and recognize that if we're still exhausted and stressed out and a little grouchy and have no friends because we're working all the time, if I'm picturing myself on the boat and I look tired and exhausted and I'm on the boat by myself because I have no friends, suddenly the boat becomes a little less exciting. And that's sort of the picture. I mean, not that I want to, have people feeling bad about themselves and their future, but that's the exercise I like to take people through to say, this career goal, this financial goal, this, even if it's, I want to tour Europe for 3 months next summer. I mean, whatever it is, if it seems really great, but then when you picture yourself in that space and you recognize that that's not kind of the end all be all, that doesn't fix the problem. If we're bringing our burnout to that problem or to that goal, if we're bringing the burnout to the goal, then who we are when we hit that goal, it suddenly becomes a little bit less exciting. And so that's when usually the transformation can start happening, when we recognize, like, I to be on the boat by myself, or I don't want this promotion. And I bring, I carry the same weight on my shoulders and the stress, and I bring the stress home to my spouse and my children. I don't want to be that anymore. It's when we recognize that great next thing that we think that we want isn't quite as great if we bring this burnout with us. It's really amazing how that can sort of catapult the transformation. It can, at minimum, it gets people thinking about maybe what I actually want, in addition to the boat or the car, maybe what I actually want is a little bit of a different life, that I'm not quite as stressed out I'm not quite as burnt out. Physically, I feel better and happier. Maybe that's ultimately what I actually am seeking. That's maybe actually what I really want. And when that happens, it's pretty powerful.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I feel like so many of us are guilty of wanting that next big thing. Cause I was just thinking, I remember before I bought my house, for example, a few years back, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's such a big deal. And it's just like such a huge step, like one of the best things I've accomplished. But then once like you're caught up in the moment and you feel the excitement in the moment, but then like once we bought a house, I'm like, okay, what's next? And so it's like there's not that time to really like enjoy or really appreciate it. And I feel like it could be the same, like in a position we might be in too. Okay, like what's next? Like what's the next big title? And so we're always like looking for what's next. So it's like as you're saying that, it just feels like if there's as if you picture yourself and you're still not satisfied, which I feel like so many people they have this goal and then they get the goal and they're still not satisfied. It's like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? So you're in this constant cycle of never really feeling that true joy or appreciation for those accomplishments that you have.
Absolutely. And that is the nature of a high achiever. That is how we're wired. I can tell that you have that mindset, and it's a gift and it's a curse. It is the gift in that we will always achieve. We will always stand out. We will always do excellent work, and we will find a way to motivate ourselves when no one else is. And those are great traits of a high achiever. But the downside can come in if we don't sort of regulate our achiever drive, where when we do have a big accomplishment, we can actually step up and say, hey, this is a big deal and I'm really excited about it. If anything, we tend to downplay accomplishments like, well, yeah, I did that, but other people have done this and that's so much bigger, or we do something and it's like, oh, well, I could have done, I mean, it was good, but I could have done better. I mean, that's sort of the nature of a high achiever is we finally get the seat at the table. And instead of sitting down and enjoying the meal, we're looking at where the bigger table is. Like, what's the next table? And it's really, really damaging to our psyche, because it's constantly telling ourselves, I worked so hard for this achievement. And then once I get to it, now I've got to downplay it. So I'm going to suddenly identify that this achievement was really no big deal. And think about when we do that year after year, and it starts in childhood. If we got a 99 on a test, we're like, oh, I could have gotten 100 if I had worked harder, and so think of a lifetime of that pattern and thinking that way, that everything we achieve, well, it was good, but now there's this other thing I should really focus on. And we never pause. It's damaging in that we don't take the time to celebrate our accomplishments and be really proud of them, and then rest and recover before we move on to the next thing. But when we create a pattern of achieve and then celebrate with no humility, without downplaying the accomplishments, just, being straightforward. Yes, I worked hard and I did accomplish that and I'm proud of it. And then taking the time to rest and recover and evaluate what we really want our next big thing to be. We actually, it's strange to say, but again, the data and science supports that when we take that time to rest and recover in between before we move on to the next big goal, we actually hit goals faster, which seems counterintuitive. I mean, it seems like, well, if you're taking this time to celebrate and then you're taking time to rest and recover, then you're taking time to plot out your next plan. That's a lot of time that you could have been getting some things done. But I mean, I can't argue with the science of it that will say that using that time in between, that's really a genius mindset, that you will still accomplish, you will still achieve, and you will actually achieve faster if you use that cycle and that pattern.
Yeah, that's such a good way of looking at it. And I'm definitely going to integrate those steps because I feel like it's just So important. And for so many of us, we, as you mentioned, downplay our achievements and successes. Maybe it's a bit of imposter syndrome. I don't know, but yeah, like I've recalled like moments where like maybe my mom had said, "Hey, good job on something," and I'm like, "Yeah, it wasn't a big deal," rather than
Right.
celebrating.
We're taught to be so modest, but like,
Yeah,
humility is a wonderful trait, but when it's like modesty to our own detriment, that's where, it really does. It does something to our minds that tells it that that wasn't enough and now I need to go do something else and I
right.
need to do more. So resting in that place of celebrating, of sharing with other people. I mean, I have a hard time. I can admit I still have a hard time if there's an accomplishment and I share it with the thought leaders in my community. We have these different like group messages, that we share things. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to tell the group I did this. And then my mind will go to a place of, well, that's not really that big of a deal. And then I have to stop and say, no, that is a big deal. You worked hard on that. And these people want to celebrate with you. And of course, as soon as I share it, they're like, oh, that's amazing. Good job, and they're really supportive. But that it is that natural instinct to say it's not really that big of a deal. And and it's not, I've seen this again in people who, I mean, who have broken world records but still are just sort of, I could have done more. And so, yeah, overcoming that, keeping humility. I mean, nobody likes a bragger, but, to that balance of being proud of your accomplishments, celebrating it, sharing it with other people so they can celebrate with you. It really is a launch pad to future accomplishment.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned bragging because sometimes I'm honestly hesitant to share
Yes.
accomplishments because like I'm afraid of being that person, like of, oh, that person, she's just bragging, And so like, what would you say the line would be that kind of crosses over that territory? And then maybe what part of it is just your own like imposter syndrome just telling you to be like, nah, don't come across as a bragger, Like what would you say like the fine line would be between those two areas?
I think a way that you can determine is, well, two things. One, who are you sharing with, right? So there's some people who share everything with everyone all of
Yeah.
the time, not encouraging that, right? There's a balance. But if you have that inner circle of people who do support you, they actually want to know. And that's where we can overcome the imposter syndrome of they will be excited for me. They will be so proud that, they knew I was working on this and I did it, and they'll be so proud and they'll be excited. So it's important to know who your inner circle is, who are the people who actually celebrate with you, because to someone who doesn't celebrate you in general, it will come across as bragging to them, even if you weren't bragging, right? Because if they don't have that spirit of wanting to celebrate you, they're not on kind of your inner circle of support. So I think it's important to have people that you're close to that celebrate your victories with you.
Yeah,
And then I
absolutely.
also think the other way you can kind of gauge is if your friend, someone that you care about and support, were to come to you and say that same thing, would you think that they were bragging or would you be really excited for them? And chances are we'd be really excited for them. So that's a good test to kind of be like, am I bragging too much? Just think of your best friend. And if they said the exact same thing, what would your reaction be? And I think those are kind of just as an interpersonal, that's sort of a way of gauging. Professionally, we always have to recognize, again, you can't tell everything to everyone. There is a line, but professionally, I think that often as women, we can be a bit more modest. Whereas, I scanning down my LinkedIn profile, I see that there are some people, primarily men, who are very good at sharing their accomplishments, but in a non bragging kind of way. It's a little bit more matter of fact. And they're able to say, with this company, we achieved this goal and we were able to help X amount of people. And, and then all the comments of people celebrating that achievement. And so I think that professionally we do have to be mindful of our professional reputation. And when we've achieved things that we've worked really hard for, certain credentials and things that make us stand out, we can't allow the imposter syndrome to say, oh, well, you got that certification, but, a lot of people have that bigger certification or, whatever it may be going on in our mind, whatever that conversation is, that each step that we're making toward our career goals, that those are things we worked hard for. And so sharing them in a professional way, I think just adds to our credibility. So we shouldn't have fear in sharing that, we again, a credential, a course completion, a promotion, those types of things, that's just part of a moving career path. So there should be no shame in sharing those things. And if we're hearing voices say, well, yeah, you did it, but it wasn't that big of a deal, then we can be pretty sure that that's imposter syndrome whispering in our ear, and it's not time to listen, but rather it's time to share with whatever that audience is, whether it's, in your inner circle at your company, or if you're sharing it on LinkedIn, whatever space that is. And earlier today, I was doing a presentation on email marketing to colleagues, to folks in the same space as me. And as I was preparing the presentation, I was just sort of like, oh, email marketing, it's kind of an older topic. It's not really fresh and new. Everybody wants to talk about AI, and this is kind of dull. And I was about 15 minutes before starting the presentation when I realized that I had failed to make a note to make sure in the presentation I covered that I had won the award for being in the top 10% in the nation of solution providers providing email marketing services to their clients. Like, I just forgot about it because I would, again, it was one of those like, well, yeah, I was in the top 10% in the nation, but I mean, I wasn't number one. So I sort of like dismissed this credential, and I thought, what are you doing? You need to establish your credibility with this group of people in a short amount of time. Let them know that 3 years in a row, you were in the top 10% in the country doing this exact thing you're going to teach them, and then keep moving forward with the presentation. And, I can't speak for the people who listened to the presentation, but I'm fairly certain that no one thought, gosh, she's bragging about her credentials. We think that's what they're going to think. But if you think about it, if I'm going to listen to a presentation, I would love to know that that person is qualified to share that information with me. So that's just an example from today of how sometimes we downplay our accomplishments.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I have to remind myself whenever I'm in an interview as well. Like, this is the time to upsell myself and not
Yeah.
be modest. And of course, in a professional way.
Right.
But it definitely takes some getting used to, because like part of me is like, okay, I don't want to cross that line into bragging, but I know it's, especially when it comes to LinkedIn, I feel like, especially with each interview, I feel like it's always a work in progress. There's always something to learn. Sometimes there'll be things I'll take away. I'm like, okay, maybe next time I might say this or upsell myself more in that way. So I feel like it's definitely like a learning process. And I think for me personally, what I found has helped is being it just kind of slowing down, because sometimes I tend to talk really fast if I get nervous. And so I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm gonna slow down, because then if I get really nervous, I start talking really fast, and then I kind of lose my train of thought. So for me, that's been really helpful to kind of humanize it in a way, to realize that the people on the other side of the desk or the other side of the screen are also people that have been in my position and that understand what I'm going through. So it's really been helpful for me, because I know it's challenging for a lot of people, especially when you're in multiple stage interviews, or for whatever it is that you're trying, if you're trying to get into a good school, or if you're working on a big project, all that stuff. I feel like there's always a benefit, and there's always something that we could probably be doing better to improve how we sell ourselves, so to speak.
Absolutely. And you used such a great word when you said, humanizing it a bit, because for so long there's been such a separation between the workplace and really like human beings, right? Humanity. There's just sort of like there's no room for humans in the workplace, right? Like they are
Right.
emotions or attitudes or, these kinds of things. And I think that the younger generations are coming in and transforming that a little bit. But I think that there really is that, even in something like an interview, obviously the interviewer knows that you're nervous and
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these elements of it, but we just try to act like, to sit in an interview and act like you're not a human being, right? Like that's ridiculous, but it's what we do. It's sort of what we're programmed to do. And I think that human element is a huge part of this trend toward burnout. I wrote an article yesterday, or I released it yesterday, just about a tragedy on Wall Street, another young person on Wall Street passing away. And it's there's a history of this, whether it's suicide or heart issues, things directly related to the job stress in the fast-paced environment in Wall Street. And so I wrote this article, really a call out for corporate responsibility in regards to burnout, but also personal responsibility. I never dismiss the personal responsibility piece. And one of the comments on the article was from someone very prominent in this space in addressing burnout. She focuses on women, female executives, and that is her whole mission as well. So I always appreciate her work in this space. There was a comment that she made just about humanity and about, being allowed to be human beings in the workplace. And so your statement reminded me of her, what she wrote on that topic. And I just think it's something, I've launched multiple companies. I've had many an employee work under me. And there is an element of finding, again, that balance between what of your personal life is appropriate for the workplace and, what is not, what do you have to leave at home? I remember the first company that I ever worked for announced at, an office meeting, and this was a large multi-billion dollar company, in finance. And they announced at an office meeting that while we think it's wonderful that your children play soccer, we don't need to hear about it in the office. If you want to talk about your children playing soccer, you should go to lunch. And that was the very clear announcement that there was to be no humanity in the office, that we were not talking about families. We were not talking about it was going to be work while we're in the office. And if you want to talk about something other than work, then you can go to lunch together, but we don't want to hear it here. And that was 20 years ago. I hope those announcements are not still being made, but it does that is a really big part of this trend toward people becoming burnt out and hiding it for fear that they'll be viewed as weak, when in reality burnout it's a human condition. And burnout is simply when your physical body isn't able to keep up with all of the greatness in your mind. And so it doesn't make you any less of a person, that your body is smart enough to tell you it's time to slow down. In fact, it actually makes you quite an intelligent person, because your body is intuitive and knows that this pace that you're working is not sustainable. And so I think there's a lot of stigma, a lot of fear of showing weakness in the workplace when it comes to burnout. But I hope to continue to be a voice for folks who are struggling with this, and also to continue my work in companies teaching this as a corporate workshop, as a top down methodology, so that the leaders in the company can identify their connection with burnout, what is the root cause, and begin changing company culture from the leadership, and then it trickles all the way down through the entire company. So it's an exciting time. It's an important topic, and I really appreciate you interviewing me and allowing me to share this information with your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I was just thinking about a position that I had years ago where that well, actually probably one of my first experiences in the corporate world of where it seemed like there was a lack of humanity, and there's been so much change even in the past maybe 10 to 15 years. And in this role, I remember we weren't supposed to talk to each other. It was a small office. We couldn't talk to each other. We couldn't listen to music, nothing like that. And so when I moved on to other positions, it actually wasn't until then that I realized how like how toxic that that was. And
Yes.
and so this is such an important topic because I feel like maybe some of us may not realize some of these things that we're going through, especially, of course, as we mentioned, workplace toxicity and burnout. But before we close out, I wanted to know what for the anti-hustle movement, what does it mean to you? And maybe what advice might you give to anyone who might find themselves caught up in the hustle and in like the modern grind of life?
I love this phrase anti-hustle movement. It means a lot to me, but I understand that it's often misconstrued. And so I want to be clear when I say I am not knocking the hustle. Like I'm a hustler, I'm going to get it done. I work hard, I'm dedicated. But this element of hustle culture where it's to hustle at any cost, right? To achieve, to get the success at any cost, even at sacrificing our own health and well being. That's the part of hustle culture that I'm against. I believe in working hard. I believe in being dedicated and diligent in the work that we have been assigned to do. But without this attention on just taking care of ourselves in general, that it's a balanced hustle. The hustle isn't sustainable. It's a, sort of flare up, burnout, and then recover. And so that mission to bring more attention to the anti-hustle movement is really to bring the attention to people who are like me. I love working with hardworking, gritty people, people who are like me, who are driven to achieve. Those are the people that I wanting to help better understand that achievement isn't achievement, achievement, or success isn't true success if when we arrive there, we have nothing left as a person. And so that redefining of success would say that to hustle is to do our best to get to the point in our life where we're able to work less, where we're able to free up our time to give to our community, to our family, to our relationships, to our hobbies, to things we're passionate about, that is the true success. And there's a wonderful quote that says, wealth is the ability to fully experience life. And that's what I want to bring to hustle culture. Let's keep hustling. Let's keep working hard. Let's have the big dreams, the big goals. But let's understand that part of that big goal or part of that wealth that we're looking to achieve is the ability to fully experience life. And so that's what it means to me. And that's why this work I think is so important. It certainly has changed my life.
Absolutely. And this is something that I'm definitely going to be implementing into my own practice because I feel like so many of us could benefit from your words of wisdom and kind of thinking out the next big thing and kind of like when I get there, I'm going to celebrate this accomplishment and take that time to rest before moving into the next one rather than fast forwarding. So I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm sure listeners will benefit from this as well. But before we kind of close out, can you tell us where our listeners can find you and connect with you, maybe learn more about your coaching?
Absolutely. So my website is Amanda which is my government name. FYI, everyone calls me Panda, but the website is amandaludwig.com. That's going to tell you about my speaking engagements and corporate workshops that I'm implementing. And then, of course, more regularly, I am posting ideas and insights and tips and tools for really working in this space. So anyone interested in that part, is the best thing to do is to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message and say, hey, I heard you on this podcast and this is the part that, was helpful for me. And we can have a conversation and go from there.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure I get those all included in the footnotes down in the comment section down below. That way everyone can go and check out all the amazing work that you do. I know I will be doing that afterwards. I know we're already connected on LinkedIn, but I might look into the coaching session myself. So it was a pleasure having you on here. And thank you so much for such an amazing discussion.
Awesome. I really appreciate you having me.